Hey everybody, this is herculespetix, founder, curator, docent, and gift shop employee of the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies. Today we're going to be looking at Wasteland number 16 through 18, continuing and ending our scholarly examination of this wonderful anthology from the late 80s. These are the last 3 issues, guys. I'm very sad. I've had such a good time revisiting these. I haven't read these in decades, but I've been rereading them to make these videos for you. And they're as good as I remember. It's an anthology. They're not all perfect, but when they hit it out of the ballpark. It's just amazing stuff in here. Storytelling, writing like no other writers in comics history, thanks to Del Close and John Ostrander. But I'm very sad to say this is the last one. But let's crack into these. I mean, I've told you before, I can't believe DC published this in the first place. And then it made it to 18 issues. So I guess I should be happy about that. That's pretty amazing that such a weird comic is made it to 18 issues. I would have thought it would have been canceled after like the first issue because it was so bizarro, especially for DC. So number 16, we got a Michael Davis cover. I think I've told you before how I feel about Michael Davis. I really do not like this guy. This is one of the worst covers I've ever seen in my life. This is just terrible. This is the most unappealing image I think that has ever graced a comic book cover. This is just terrible. Bunch of football players. Instead of a football, they've got a pig's head. In the hands of a good artist, maybe that would be a cute commentary. I don't know. But it's just so badly drawn and designed. And sorry to be so negative, but really do not like this guy. I'm sure he's a fine person, but I don't want him drawing Wasteland. The first story we got here is The Woman Who Tried to Find God. John Ostrander flying solo on the writing, but he's adapting it from an African folktale. Bill Ray on art. And it's got that wonderful, it's a very serious comic, but it's kind of cartoony, Bill Ray. He's got that amazing blend where he can do serious cartooniness. And it's not like it takes away from the seriousness of the story, but it is very cartoony. So there's this woman in Africa, and, all of her family has died. Her friends have died. She lives in the bad part of Africa where, there's lots of famine. And she's bitter. She wants answers. She basically wants to confront God and be able to ask him the tough question, like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, why does everyone have to die? This sucks for us humans down here. So she realizes, he lives in the sky. God lives in the sky. I've got to reach him. So she chops down these trees and tries to make these almost like Tower of Babel-like constructions to reach the sky. But, they keep rotting at the base and falling over. She builds another one. Same thing. So finally she realizes there's got to be a place on Earth where I can reach heaven. So she leaves her homeland and goes on a journey. And she travels around the world. And finally, she ends up in, looks like, it is New York City. There's a Statue of Liberty. And she finds the world's tallest building, Trimp Tower. I don't know if that's an homage to Herb Trimpe or just a parody on Donald Trump. She takes the elevator all the way to the top. And there's a construction worker there. And he says, "What are you doing up here, woman?" She says, "I'm seeking God." He says, "Why are you doing that?" She says, "Is there anyone who has suffered more than I?" He says, "How are you hurting?" She says, "I'm all alone. All my friends and family have been taken from me." And the guy says, "So what? How does that make you different from anyone else? Same damn thing happens to all of us. You live long enough, everyone you know is going to die at you. That's how it is." So she dies of heartbreak. And no one knows where her grave is. And I love the way John Ostrander ends this. The last caption says, "Stand up, go home. My tale is done." Harsh. Some harsh truths. Next story is All I Want for Christmas is the Head of Idi Amin. It's narrated by Del Close. I think he was the impetus for the story, but John Ostrander, helps transcribe or whatever he does. And the art's by Don Simpson. And in the narration, Del Close says, "This is the Christmas tale I've always wanted to tell." So apparently one day a year, Santa Claus, the real Santa Claus, actually sits in at those like Macy's, big department store Santa chairs. And on that day, when Santa does this, every wish has to be fulfilled, no matter what it is. I like this one kid, he's whispering in Santa's ear, and then he yells over to their parents, "Hey, he wants an electric duck." Whatever the hell that is. Then this little kid who's very Calvin and Hobbesy, he's got a little Hobbes doll. He says, "I want the head of Idi Amin." Santa says, "He's dead." And he's like, "No, he's alive, and I want his head for Christmas. If you're really Santa, you'll get it for me." So Santa, as soon as he gets done with his shift, he walkie-talkies to the elves at the North Pole and says, "Guys, we got a big job to do. This isn't your ordinary Christmas request, and we have to fulfill it." So he gets to this like brain thing. It's almost like Cerebro, the thing Professor X has. It like augments his mental facilities, his consciousness. And he looks around the world and he sees Idi Amin is alive in Africa. He's hiding out. So he gets all the elves together for like a military commando mission. The sleigh is camo. They're all wearing like military fatigues and they've got amazing armament. And they fly to Africa and just totally have a full-out armed assault on this camp. Santa confronts Idi Amin, and Idi Amin is just like, "Santa Claus, I love you." And Santa's kind of like, he's actually teary-eyed. He's like, "Even here, they remember, they believe. You're breaking my heart." Because Idi Amin has like stockings on his mantle, his chimney. He really is like a big kid who believes in Santa Claus and Christmas and everything. So while Santa's sitting there wiping his tears out of his eyes, Idi Amin takes advantage of that moment and tries to kill him. And Santa pulls out a samurai sword and chops his head off. And then he rides off. Ho, ho, ho. He goes to that little Calvin and Hobbes kid, and he brings the head of Idi Amin. Turns out, the whole time, he was a dupe of the CIA. Calvin was working for the CIA. And Santa's totally pissed off. He's like, "That's it. Next year, the whole world's getting coal in their stockings." A very Del Close story. He's like the only guy who could write a story like that. The next story is Heart Shadow. Written once again solo by John Ostrander, art by Rick Magyar. And this is just a little character study. It's very bleak. This woman is obviously showing the signs of clinical depression. She can barely get out of bed. And she bought a revolver, bad combination. Clinically depressed person with a gun. And every morning she aims it at her chest and fires it. But she still hasn't loaded it. So we basically, all the captions are her thoughts and how she sees the world. And it's a very dark outlook. She just pities all the people who like are young and haven't been beaten down by life yet. She's like, maybe I should shoot this girl before she gets disappointed with life. Now she's young and cocky and thinks she's got the world by the short hairs, but she'll learn. We find out her life is pretty horrible. She kind of seeks out men who are abusive. That's her thing, because she was abused by her father as a child. Here's a flashback. She also has this thing for Michael Jackson. She's kind of like a stalker. and she's totally in love with him. She goes to a parade one day where Michael Jackson's going to be, and she runs up to the car, and she says, "My name is Sherry, and I love you." And Michael Jackson says, "Thank you, Sherry." Sorry, my voice is very shot right now. I can't even imitate Michael Jackson's voice. And she returns to the sidewalk, and she feels her hand grasping the gun in her pocket. And she's following the car. But then the car takes a hard left and just speeds off. And she's like, she knows she'll never see him again. So back at her house, she's actually loading the gun. And she's just done. I love how she says that it's a shame that her landlord just painted the room for me. So she's like, she doesn't want to mess it up. She says, "I just want it to be over." And the camera pulls outside her house, and we hear blam. It's just a really sad, depressing story. Well, not much of a story. Nothing really happens, but just this character piece of this incredibly depressed woman. Wasteland number 17, we have a Don Simpson cover. This is kind of a old concept. We've seen this many times before. The cartoonist is drawing, like a monster comic, and the monster that he's drawing is about to pounce on him. It's almost like those infinity covers, First story we have is The Enemy of Krishna. This is writer Del Close with continuity by John Ostrander, art by Bill Ray, with an assist from Tony Salmons. I don't know if you guys remember Tony Salmons, a very idiosyncratic artist from the 80s, mostly the 80s. And he was so weird, though, because it's such a weird style. I actually found it kind of off-putting. I never liked his style. A lot of my friends think he's great, but I was just like, eh. But for some reason, he always got these major mainstream jobs at Marvel and DC, like drawing Spider-Man and shit. It was weird. He had such a non-house style. And yet, I guess he was a good schmoozer, or, good at making relationships in the business. But I gotta say, I think this is more than an art assist. Because I almost like all Bill Ray's cartooning. When he's serious, when he's funny, and it's always kind of appealing. I think Tony Salmons really worked this over. And I think that's why I don't like it. It's not very good art. So we start off, we have Krishna and Arjuna. Arjuna is basically Krishna's most devoted follower on earth. He's a very powerful general. Every army he conquers, it's in the name of Krishna. Then he rules those vanquished people justly as a good ruler, all in the name of Krishna. He just is devoted to Krishna. Yeah, this art is really not doing it for me. This is pretty, that's all I can say. So Arjuna grows old, as people do, and he's getting pretty close to dying. And Krishna comes to him and says, I've got great news for you. I'm going to give you one of the best honors I've ever given a human. When you die, you're going to come sit at my right side for all eternity. And Arjuna says, then I am free of the cycle of birth and rebirth? Of birth and death? And Krishna says, not quite. So for some reason, he still has to go through 100 more lifetimes, 100 more reincarnations, if he's a friend of Krishna. But you can choose to go through 10 more lifetimes, only 10, as Krishna's enemy. And Arjuna says, how can I be your enemy? I love you above all. And Krishna says, choose. And he loves Krishna so much that he can't wait to be, seated in his beautiful presence for all eternity, that he picks the 10 lives where he has to be the enemy of Krishna. And Krishna kind of says, I was hoping you wouldn't do that. So He does. That's his choice. So he tells all of his people that he's going to sacrifice himself to the spider god of the mountain cave. And they carry him there on a berth. And he goes into the cave, just lets himself drop into it. And he's thinking the love of Krishna will protect me from this agony. Because it looks horrible. This giant spider just devours him. And he has to do it 10 times. He has to keep dying. He gets born again, and then he has to jump in the cave again and go through this painful death. On his 10th death, though, he's all kind of happy. He's like, I made it. Now I'll get to sit next to Lord Krishna for all time. But it doesn't end. He's like, did Krishna lie to me? Only my love for Krishna protects me from the full horror of my situation. And the spider all of a sudden has Krishna's face. And Krishna says, only when you learn to hate and fear Krishna can you serve as my enemy. And then your tortures begin. And he screams, Krishna! And then all of a sudden we cut to the modern day. We see this guy, he's like in a lab undergoing a past life, what do they call those? Oh, past life regression experiment. And he's yelling, Krishna! And they have no idea why he yelled that. And they escort him back to his cell. So I assume these are prisoners who have volunteered to do these experiments. And in his cell, when he's all alone, he says, Krishna? And he turns around. And that's how the comic ends. So I don't really get that ending. I guess I really don't get the whole comic. But it's pretty interesting. The next story is called Burning Houses. John Ostrander solo again. Michael Davis, artist and colorist. So we're going to see how bad Michael Davis is as a colorist as well as an artist. And the story is narrated by an artist. And he says, my house is burning. I failed to see the fire coming. This marks me. This is a moral lapse on my part. I failed to perceive the dangers of apartheid. He's a white man. So then we proceed to, John Ostrander proceeds to just tell us the whole history of apartheid in South Africa with all these like pin-up one-pagers by Michael Davis. Look at these colors. What the hell's going on there? These are gross. I mean, each color by itself isn't, but just such a weird mishmash of colors that don't belong together. More history, just going through the decades. And then the whole time as a narrator, he's saying, yeah, then this happened, but I was an artist. And at first I just thought I could ignore it. Then I realized it was a problem. But then, like how artists are, where they trick themselves into thinking what they're doing is very important. He says, I firmly believe that only art would make any lasting changes because only art can open the heart and thus liberate the mind for real change, which is obviously totally bullshit. Takes us all the way up to the present. I wanted to point out this page too. This purple and yellow. These colors are gross. Oh, here's more purple and yellow. So now we actually go into the slight future, the day after tomorrow, if you will. So I guess, slightly in the future, South Africa totally has a revolution. All the black people in South Africa are fed up and they revolt. And it turns into this bloody, violent race war. Just carnage in the streets, black people killing white people trying to kill the black people back. Just, it gets nasty. And that's when the nations of the West intervened. When asked why they didn't get involved before this, the Western government said they did not interfere with what was an internal affair of a sovereign nation. When they were asked why they did so now, they argued it was in the name of humanity. So then the question is, how come you've never intervened in Lebanon? Well, Lebanon doesn't have diamonds and gold and uranium and plutonium. Also, in Lebanon, it's just a bunch of Arabs killing a bunch of other Arabs. But now that black people are killing white people, yeah, America is going to get involved. This guy's still painting. He's like, yeah, this is a terrible situation, but, you know, he realizes the fire has burned out of control, the metaphorical fire. But he's still painting. He thinks it's going to change things. So, America does send troops in. The black American soldiers mutinied, refused to join the invasion. Summary court-martials and summary executions were threatened by the U.S. president. So the U.S. ghettos exploded. And so America has this total race war. It's like spreads to America. And we see the narrator. It looks like he's been shot in the eye and his house is on fire. He's dying. And he says, the street I live on isn't in Pretoria or Johannesburg. I live in Detroit. And we realize that now America is completely like this horrible, violent race war. Oh, this is nice. We have the third episode of The Dead Detective, Croak McCraw. The Swan Song of the Dead Detective. Solo, John Ostrander writing. William Mesner Loebs on art and letters. And art assist by John A. Peck. It looks like the Dead Detective is right back where he started off, back in his office, back in his little chair. He's still immobile. He's still conscious, even though he's dead. And then all of a sudden, these like Secret Service agents come in, grab him, and they take him to the White House. Throw him in a wheelchair and take him to the White House. Put him behind the desk in the Oval Office. And he thinks to himself, I'm at a loss to explain this. His press secretary comes in, and then his wife comes in, the First Lady. And, they just think he's this vegetable and cripple. And so the press secretary all of a sudden just starts macking on the First Lady. And she's like, no, not in front of him. So apparently they've done this before. And he's like, I must have you here in the center of power. And then this poor guy, the dead detective, he can't move. He can't do anything. He's got to watch them having sex in the Oval Office. He says, if you don't respect the man, at least respect the office. Come on, you guys. So then all of a sudden, the vice president walks in, who also happens to be the dead detective's son. He looks just like Alfalfa from the Little Rascals. And the Secret Service pokes their head in and says, hey, guys, it's time. We got to go to NORAD. So Air Force 1 and 2 fly out there. And they're giving this big speech. All this media people are there. And while everyone's distracted by the speech, the press secretary just shoots plugs the president with 10 bullets. And then says, oh my God, they shot the president. He's dead. So this general says, get everyone, the VIPs into the mountain, into NORAD, and shoot all the newsmen. And these soldiers just start machine gunning all the media. You hear them their bloody cry. Aye. So in the NORAD, the bunker, I guess the dead detective, at least in their eyes, is finally really dead because he was shot. So the vice president is now president. And the general says, I think it was the Ruskies who killed the president. We should do a first strike, nuclear assault. And Alfalfa is just like, if you think so, go ahead. Launches the nuclear bombs Russia retaliates. And, just like in Doctor Strangelove, they don't give a shit. They're just like, no acceptable casualties. The IRS will be functioning in 90 days. Everything will be back to normal, and, we can keep chugging along. But then this one guy comes up and says, General, the big one happened in California. California sunk into the ocean. And the San Andreas Fault is this big gaping maw. And some of the Soviet missiles went into this San Andreas Fault. And then a lot of the water from the Pacific fell into it. Went to the center of the Earth, got heated up, and the Earth's crust couldn't take the steam. Couldn't release all the steam in time. So the whole Earth blows up. And this last page is so well illustrated. I don't know. This looks like old William Esner Loeb's, like when he was drawing Journey. But after the Earth blows up, we see the dead detective in his wheelchair just floating through space, heading towards the sun. And he's thinking to himself, this will probably never make sense. Poor dead detective. He truly is gets fucked over by fate constantly. So here it is, guys, the last issue, number 18. We got a cover by Bill Ray. Has nothing to do with the inside. And it's kind of transgressive, this necrophilia romance cover. So, guys, as you can see, this is crazy. This has never happened before in Wasteland. We continue the story from last issue. It's always been 4 short stories, totally unrelated. But this issue is going to be a giant blockbuster, Easter egg-laden, self-referential epic for Wasteland readers. Story by John Ostrander and Del Close. Pencil art and lettering by Donald Simpson. The inks are by Bill Ray, and William Esner Loeb's is drawing all of the dead detectives. So it's kind of like a jam. The name of the story is called 86. So we continue right from where we left off. The dead detective is floating towards the sun. Bookman stamp, 25 cents. That was the place in Tucson where I get all my 25-cent comics, or a lot of them. And just goes to show you, Wasteland was not appreciated by collectors. One of the best comics ever to come out of Marvel or DC in the 80s, or ever. And they just went right to the quarter bins. Nobody gave a shit. Except for me and a few friends. So as he's about to fall into the sun, all of a sudden, a UFO owned by Illusions Unlimited. I don't know if you guys remember, these were those godlike imps that created reality. That was a Wasteland story a few issues back. And they're like, grab him. They call him a prop, basically. We see the lisping actor from that one story. They apply these bolts to his neck and these stitches in his forehead. The illusion imps. And then they're like, sound up, speed, and action. So the dead detective now, kind of looking like Frankenstein, is on this operating table. Victor von Frankenstein's experimenting on him. And then this lawyer, who we realize is that lawyer from that one story, the lawyer who dressed up as an old lady with a cigar in her mouth, his mouth, it's the same lawyer. And he's like the von Frankenstein family lawyer, and he's advising him that resurrectionism and grave robbing is against the law. Puts on his mask, his lawyer mask. And then he tells Victor, what if I told you how to make an invisible, immortal monster? Far more wonderful than the stinking heap of carrion. And puts on some roller skates for some reason. Kind of a little throwback to that very first issue of Wasteland when Del Close is skating through the sewers. And he tells Victor more about this monster. It's a corporation. He's saying, why are you wasting your time on this kind of Frankenstein bullshit? We could create something way more terrifying, way more monstrous. Another throwback to that story I was talking about. He shoots a rat. It's a giant rat, though. And Victor von Frankenstein's convinced. He says, is it too late for me to get out of pre-med and into corporate law? And they walk off together. They're going to make a corporation. So the godlike imps say, cut and scene. We see all these Easter egg type stuff in here. There's a Big Mama from the Del Close autobio story where he goes to see the voodoo priestess. There's Del Close in his frock that he wore in the Beware the Blob part he had, the acting role. We see the guy from the Harvey Pekar parody, the old guy who works with the Harvey Pekar knockoff. He's reading misogynist funnies. He's laughing his head off. It's just a non sequitur. I don't understand. They take the dead detective and they throw him in this giant bin that's like for all the props. He's basically just a prop. We see lots of Wasteland Easter eggs. The giraffe from that one story with the electrocuted giraffe. The slashed eyeball from that Del Close story where his cat tore at his eye. And the dead detective, the hole in his forehead he's had this whole time from his bullet wound. One of the star worms comes out. Very Mr. Mind looking from Captain Marvel. And the detective was actually thrilled by this. He's saying, okay, I have been really dead this whole time. All those thoughts I thought I was having was this star worm who just took over my body as a vehicle. And the star worm regrets to inform him. He's like, well, I'm not in your body anymore, and you're still thinking, aren't you? So that's not a good theory. And he says, maybe you're throwing your voice. He says, I'm just speaking to you with telepathy. I have no voice. He's like, maybe you're throwing your mind. And the star worm is just like, oh, dude, just face it. So he says, okay, I'm going to leave the room. If you're still thinking after I leave, then whatever. But I have a feeling you will be thinking. But maybe, you're right. And after I leave the room, you'll stop thinking. And the camera pulls back. We see the dead detective immobile in this pile of crap. And he's not thinking for like 3 whole panels. But then we see his thought balloon. Ah, jeez. So he's still conscious, even though he's immobile and dead. We see that Del Close giant eyeball. When he got his eye scratched, the pain was so bad he hallucinated that his eyeball was, bulging out of his head. Pretty horrifying image. So the UFO ship, it looks like it's piloted by these like Star Trek looking dudes. And one of them goes crazy, the helmsman, and he hits the self-destruct and the whole UFO blows up. The dead detective, falls on some of the debris, which protects him from burning up in the Earth's atmosphere. And, of course, he lands right in his old office building, goes through the roof, crashes right into his office, bounces off the floor, and lands right in his chair where he started. Through no fault of his own, or no volition. Meanwhile, the metamorph from that one story, she shows up, crashes in the window. She says, it's my time to spawn, forgive me. And she starts getting down with him. And then this angel, this like mafia angel shows up with a shotgun, blows her away. This looks pretty good, the combination of Don Simpson, William Ezra Loebs, Bill Ray Inks. It's pretty fun, like cartoony. So the angel takes the dead detective all the way up to heaven. Heaven looks a little shoddy. There's barbed wire and graffiti at the gates. And dead detective is crying. He's got a tear in his eye. He's like, finally. And when he sees God's throne, it's Santa Claus. God is Santa Claus. He throws him down at the left hand of God. And he says, now this time stay there. Then all of a sudden his stomach starts rumbling and expanding, and all these star worms come out. And also, John Ostrander and Del Close come out. And they run for the stairs. And it says, The Adventures of Del and John. And for some reason, we see all these random DC characters. You know, some huge characters like Wonder Woman, but then Hawk and Dove. We got Swamp Thing down here. Just all these weird, it's inexplicable how they chose these random superheroes. We see the postnatal abortion from that first issue, the sci-fi tale, the one they threw out the window. Yeah, this comic, you definitely have to read the first 17 to really appreciate it. Definitely more references to that first issue story where Del Close is in the sewers shooting rats. This newspaper was in that issue, Beatles Invade USA. They go down into the sewers, and John Ostrander says, well, I guess this is the end, and they hug. And then they do this crazy pratfall, and John says, can't have an emotional moment without slapstick. And then I love this. Del Close says, provisions for the journey, a Swamp Thing tuber. So obviously they were fans of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. Del Close just, on his roller skates, takes off down the sewer, chomping on a tuber. And John just says, I guess I'll go back to the surface. When he gets up to the surface, it's like covered with mushrooms, with these little signs telling the various, whatever, phylum or types of mushrooms. One of them says Amanita belushi. And then one of them says fugu, which, if you remember, first issue, that great story illustrated by David Lloyd, where fugu is this like mushroom that one taste will just instantly kill you. And people become not addicted to it because it kills you. You can't get addicted. But it becomes very popular because everyone wants to taste a little death. So John Ostrander picks one of the fugus up, sniffs it, is about to taste it, and then he throws it over his shoulder. He's like, nah. And then as he walks off into the distance, there's this very random quote about Aleister Crowley. Don't really see how it has anything to do with anything in this story. So just a crazy ending to Wasteland. Like, what a way to end it. It's like it ends with a bang and a whimper. It ends with a wang. And like such a crazy last panel, but also it's kind of a thrill ride going through all of this references to Wasteland's history. But then it's also kind of just like, what? That's it? I mean, Wasteland was canceled at this issue, but I think even if it wasn't, this issue would have gotten them canceled. The editors would have been like, enough of this shit, guys. I can't believe this was published. This is just outright nuttiness and zaniness. And I'm so glad they did. Kudos to DC. In the letter page, Mike Gold has a nice half-page explanation of why they got canceled. Basically, low sales. They were surprised they made it to 18 themselves. And they thank everyone. Whatever. But man, still sad about this shit. I wish Wasteland was going today. Though I guess, without Del Close, he died a while back. It really wouldn't be Wasteland. So that's it, guys. 16 through 18 of Wasteland. The day the weirdness died. The dream is over, as Yoko Ono once said. And I'm really sad. I had a great time looking at these and sharing them with you. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I guess in maybe a week or two, I did Epic Illustrated. I did Wasteland. I'm going to pick another anthology to take a deep dive into, do some scholarly examinations of. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but I got a little while to think about it. I have a lot of ideas, but not positive. But I'm definitely going to try to do something different. I mean, it won't be hard to find something different. Wasteland's like no other comic that ever existed. So look forward to that. And I hope to see you next time here at the Herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies.